Welcome to Will Stir, Shake, and Solve the Illegal Robocall Problem, our 38th web education event covering technical, business, and partner topics to help service providers and enterprises build better voice networks. Illegal robocalls continue to be a significant problem for consumers and businesses of all sizes. StirShaken is expected to reduce illegal spam calls, but those behind the illegal calls will persist, wasting time, clogging up phone lines, and in some cases, perpetrating phishing attacks. Join us as we discuss the current state of StirShaken and explain why further robocall mitigation is required. Stay with us as Gerry Christensen, the VP of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at YouMail, joins us to share an AI-powered Robocall Analytics platform that can be used by service providers and enterprises to block much of the unwanted traffic. We'll leave plenty of time for some Q&A with Gerry, so let's get going. All right, I'm Alan Percy. I'm the CMO for TelcoBridges and the host for today's event. And joining us is Gerry Christensen. He's the VP of Business Development at YouMail. And Gerry, thanks again for sharing some of your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Alan. It's great to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, so are we. All right, let's just go through what our agenda for today is. We've covered some of the introductions. And we're also going to talk a little bit about a background on StirShaken, and we promise we're not going to go into all the nitty-gritty of StirShaken. We've covered that many times before. We'll talk about where do we stand relative to StirShaken and where we are in the timeline. And then we'll go beyond StirShaken and talk about Robocall Mitigation. We'll talk about where to learn some more, and then we'll have lots of time to cover your questions. So let's keep moving. All right, we did see quite a few new faces on our registration list, so I just want to do a quick overview of who TelcoBridges is, and then Gerry will move on and have you introduce YouMail. So TelcoBridges is a software developer and manufacturer of telecommunications equipment, including media gateways and session border controller software, primarily focused on the service provider and large enterprise market. It's employee-owned, been around since 2002 with roughly 40 employees. Based in Montreal, Canada, and we've got sales and support offices in Turkey, Hong Kong, and Italy, and that way we can provide 24/7 support. So, and it's a great place to work, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it for nearly 3 years now. So, Gerry, why don't you give us a little bit of background on YouMail?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a visual voicemail company, and we've been doing that since 2007. And more recently, we realized that because we're a visual voicemail company that has this app that you can download on an OTT basis for your smartphone, and our customers not only get the voicemails that they want to get, but also from the unwanted robocall bad actors, because we see that, we realize that we have data that would be very valuable on a B2B basis. So we run analytics on that data and then offer it as a service to the B2B ecosystem for both the carriers and also the enterprise. And so that would be call centers and IP PBXs and things like that.
Great, good. And based in, I guess the headquarters in San Diego, right?
Actually, Irvine, California.
Irvine, okay,
yeah,
very good.
We're a very virtual organization. Myself, for example, I'm in the Olympia, Washington area.
Excellent, very good. Thanks for the intro. All right, let's move on and talk a little about the state of StirShaken. And I was challenged a little while ago. Somebody said to me, can you tell me about StirShaken in one slide? And so maybe I'm going to cheat a little bit because it's got some animations in it. But in a nutshell, and those of you I saw that are on the call from some of the Addis and some of the others that have been building this stuff, you're probably going to cringe. It's oversimplification. But this seems to help people understand, at least, you know, the common business person, what to expect from StirShaken. So, you know, like every telephone call that's been made since probably the 1950s, this is what happens. You know, that your telephone originator on the left makes a call. Their telephone is connected to an originating service provider. That traverses a number of usually intermediate service providers, passing that call on to a terminating service provider, who then passes it to one of their subscribers, and the phone rings. So how does StirShaken layer on top of this? Well, a key piece of the StirShaken specification is that this originating service provider can say, hey, I know who this subscriber is, and I can attest that they have permission to use the number that they're calling for caller ID. And I have permission to pass calls using stir shaken. And with that, then the originating service provider will pack up the call and provide as I nickname it, kind of a cone of protection around the call. The stir shaken security identity token, which secures that call while it traverses the intermediate operators. And when it gets to the terminating service provider, they look at this this package, the stir shaken package, and they can say, hey, this is the originating service provider is valid, right? We know that they're given permission to pass them from checking on other sources. They attested that the caller ID is legitimate and it has not been manipulated. So therefore, I will pass the call on to my end customer as a verified call. So this is a best case scenario, an attestation of A, which is the highest level. There's many other scenarios beyond that stir shaken handles, but in a nutshell, in one slide, that's what it does. So the question then becomes well, that should do the trick, right? So let's just quick go over what stir shaken does do, and then we can talk about what it doesn't do. So it does secure the caller ID information that I showed you. The originating operator attests as to whether the caller has permission to use the number. It either is their own number or they've been given permission to use somebody else's number for example, like a reverse 911 call or something like that. As I mentioned, there's 3 levels of attestation, and we won't go into what they are, but A is the highest and C is the lowest. It can tell the subscriber if the call has attestation. And it also provides traceback, which is very important. Matter of fact, in some cases, it's almost more important than everything you've seen above. That allows the agencies to go find where the bad calls are coming from. All right, so let's talk about what it doesn't do. Well, first of all, it doesn't pass the level of attestation to the called party, which is always kind of scratch my head on that one. I never quite understood why that did happen, but there's reasons. It doesn't monitor the patterns of calling or abuse. It doesn't know the intent of the caller. It can't differentiate between legitimate and fraudulent behavior, meaning if the call gets through, stir shaken, it doesn't know what you're trying to do with the call. It can't redirect suspicious traffic on its own. The service providers have to do that. And similarly, it doesn't terminate known fraudulent calls. So if a fraudulent call gets through stir shaken, it'll just not have verification, but it's up either the service provider or the recipient to ignore it. So does a bunch of things, doesn't do a whole bunch of other things. So we just wanted to make sure that was clarified. So let's just talk a little bit about where we are on the timeline with stir shaken. And this is basically recognizing that we're in the early days still with stir shaken. The timeline here is a little bit squished and skewed, but the whole Do Not Call Act started in 2003, 2009. Congress passed into law the Truth in Calling Act. FCC called for a stir shaken implementation. And then in 2019, the Trace Act was signed into law. And as we said on previous webinars, the Trace Act changed everything because it changed a lot of the rules that service providers have to adhere to when it comes to passing traffic or not, and about implementing stir shaken. So just last month, there was a big deadline with the Robocall Mitigation database implementation, and all the filings were due. And this is where every service provider in the U.S. Had to log onto the system and fill out a Robocall Mitigation record. And last I checked, there's 400 pages of service providers in that database who've gone through that process of filing. And then, of course, the yellow arrow is where we are today, and there is an upcoming deadline in September, which is where service providers have the option to not accept traffic from a call that was from a service provider that was not in the Robocall Mitigation database. And that wording of that is may not accept. In some cases I've seen it shall not accept. So it's a little fuzzy to me at least as to whether or not where that stands. So We're making progress, but we're far from fully implementing stir shaken across the whole network. So one of the things I've been trying to clarify, in fact, this came from some of the COVID training I took about how security works. And I wanted to point out it's kind of like Swiss cheese, right? Every method that you put up to stop somebody from making or doing something illegal, there's a layer to it. And in the robocall battle, there's really turns out to be 3 layers. It's number 1 is knowing your customer, that the service provider does indeed know who the customer is and can trust that the customer is going to behave. The second one is stir shaken, meaning we're going to take that call that's been attested to and we're going to transport it and protect it from being molested. And the third step then is performing analytics on the call, knowing more about the caller and the called purpose, and then eventually letting calls go through to the destination. So how this works is, for example, if a bad guy makes a call and they're on a network and the network knows that it's one of their customers, they're going to let it go. If they try to manipulate the caller ID, the stir shaken will catch it and stop it. Another scenario is the bad guy passes a call. It makes it through your customer threshold. But he does indeed end up with somehow or another a valid stir shaken attestation, and it's going to get passed on to the terminating service provider. But that terminating service provider, if he uses analytics, can catch it before it gets to the subscriber. And of course, the last scenario is a good call that would pass through, know your call, pass through the stir shaken process, and eventually through analytics and make it to the customer. So that's the goal, right? Is to have it so that the end customer only gets calls that pass through these 3 layers. And we're going to talk about that third layer today, the analytics. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gerry, who's going to walk us through some of the analytics involved in robocall protection.
All right, so this is just a high-level slide just to represent that the robocall problem is not going away. If anything, it's getting bigger and bigger every year. Now, granted, recently we've seen some positive impacts as a result of stir shaken. We can get into that in a little bit. But by and large, the bad guys are not giving up. They're just looking for the path of least resistance. And we anticipate that that's going to continue happening. The image on the right-hand side depicts the fact that it's been found that the phone as a medium of communications is the most intimate way of communicating with somebody. And that's why, sadly, we see things like this poor woman in Stockton that lost $40,000. So this kind of thing is not going to go away. Stir shaking is certainly helpful. It's table stakes, but it's definitely not enough. There's a need for analytics. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. This is just a representation of some of the documentation that we've seen in the industry, some of the things that have come out in terms of reports and orders from the FCC. And it's important to note here that YouMail is probably best known for our robocall index. We track what's happening. We do it by geography. And soon we're going to be tracking it in other ways as well, such as we have a service where we protect brands. So we're going to start to track where we start to see impacts on brands based on keywords and things of that nature. So go ahead and advance. So here's what we do. As I mentioned earlier, we started off as a visual voicemail company, and we still do that. But we realized about 12 months or so ago that we really need to automate the protection that we already provide for our own customers of visual voicemail, automate it with the intent of having a repeatable, reproducible process to support our B2B customers on the robocall data services side. So we see and we hear what is left in these voicemails. You see a transcription here of one of the more well-known attacks. This is the SSA attack, the Social Security Administration fraud. Here you see a transcription of it. This is from actual audio that's captured within the system. From a traceback perspective, we have all the data associated with the various unwanted robocalls. So you see some of that illustrated here. And this is really important too, because when we work with the ITG, and we're one of the preferred providers to work with the U.S. Telecom's industry traceback group. We use our data as evidential proof of wrongdoing to initiate a traceback. And that's important too, because there's a lot of possible tracebacks that could occur, number one. And then number two, there's a cost associated with doing these tracebacks. So we use evidential proof of the wrongdoing as evidenced by this transcription and the actual audio. And then of course, the information necessary to perform the trace to work with the ITG to track down the unwanted robocall players, remove them from the network, and in some cases even prosecute them, typically civilly, but it's potentially criminal penalties as well. Let's go ahead and advance. So how do we do this and how do we automate it? That's what's depicted in this slide here. So what we did was we devised a way to separate out the good, valid voicemails, like Jerry's wife leaving a message saying, hey, you need to pay the credit card bill before it's overdue, an automated way of separating those from the unwanted robocall voicemail transcriptions. Now, obviously, we wanted to do that for a PII perspective. We wanted to protect people's privacy. And so the most simplistic way of thinking about this is if you looked at the waveform for some of these recordings, you could clearly see that the waveform of my wife leaving a message is very unique because it's based on her speech patterns. But if you were to compare that to the waveform of a credit card scam, somebody leaving a message for Gerry Christensen that says, hey, this is your credit card company, you need to call me and give me all your private data so I can steal from you, wink, wink. If you were to look at that waveform, you would notice that it repeats itself thousands of times. So as a human being, you could look at that and see, here's one unique waveform, here's 10,000 waveforms that all look the same way. So what we did was we implemented AI and machine learning, as well as digital fingerprinting, to be able to very quickly identify those unwanted waveforms associated with unwanted robocall campaigns, apply a digital fingerprint to them so that they're easily traceable and trackable across a variety of different telephone numbers, and make that a very quick automated process. Because even though, again, I could do that with my human brain and my human eyes, it doesn't work very well when you're dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of calls. And so it's also particularly important too, because one of the things that we found, and I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people that have been tracking what's going on with robocalls, is a lot of them use a snowshoe spam tactic. And snowshoe spam, if you're not familiar with it, is just like in the real world, you put on a snowshoe so you don't sink through the snow. The bad guys will spread the weight around, so to speak, of their calls, so that instead of having one call that places 100,000 calls, one number that places 100,000 calls, instead it'll be one telephone number or many telephone numbers that place just a few calls. So it's very hard to detect because it looks like a power user or it looks like perhaps a small to medium-sized business line. But our AI and machine learning detects it because we see the actual audio. And again, we can follow that around as they switch from number to number, which is exactly what they do. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So this is just an example of one of the solutions. And I think it's important to note here that there are both real-time solutions as well as non-real-time solutions. This is an example of a real-time solution where we are endeavoring to protect IP PBXs and UCAS providers so that desired calls get through and unwanted calls are stopped. And the way that we do that is with a real-time solution working with partners like TelcoBridges, where we provide the YouMail data to a session border controller. Now, Alan's going to get into this in greater detail in a slide that's coming up here in a few minutes, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention now to let you know that this is a real-time solution, but we also have non-real-time solutions where we simply provide data to a customer. And one of the ways that that can be used is to support the FCC's ruling of not originating unwanted robocalls, because sometimes traffic aggregators don't even know that unwanted robocalls are being originated from the network. As Alan was alluding to earlier, stir shaken is not enough. It's one thing to have a policy of knowing your customer, and that's another thing to have procedures in place such as stir shaken. But there's really a need for analytics to be able to detect what your customers are actually doing. because even in the best KYC, know your customer process, you can't anticipate exactly what your customers are going to be doing. So let's go ahead and advance down. So this is just a way of getting a hold of me for subsequent questions if anybody has anything that comes up after this. So you can go ahead and advance down. And so here's one of our slogans: every call should be safe and productive. Not just YouMail customers, our tens of millions of customers, but every customer. And that's why we provide our data services to both carriers as well as the enterprise ecosystem. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Gerry. That was very interesting. So let's move on and talk about how to implement this kind of mitigation in the real world with service providers and enterprises and all kinds of different scenarios. So, if we're looking at this kind of challenge, there really are 4 points that we can do mitigation. The first one is that the originating service provider, right? They could stop the calls or flag them before they ever leave their network at the origination side. Similarly, the terminating service provider, before they pass the call off to the subscriber, could say, whoa, something's wrong here. This isn't right. And I'm going to either redirect the call or block it or somehow indicate to the consumer that there's a problem. And by the way, this method, the terminating service provider, is how a lot of the robocall blocking that's happening today into cell phones and in some of the mobile service providers are putting, spam likely, et cetera. That's just through, analytics on the terminated service provider. There's also a third one, which is to provide mitigation as a service, and we're going to talk about that. And then lastly, leave it up to the subscriber to protect their network as they go. So 4 points here real quick. I'm going to go through them. So taking a little closer look at the originating service provider. The use case in this situation is on the right-hand side, you can see the subscribers' telephones are connected in through the originating service provider to generally a soft switch or a TDM switch. That would be interfaced into one of our session border controller platforms, our ProSBC, passing an invite of the call, which would basically tell the platform the calling and called number. And what we're going to do is you can do some data from YouMail's reputation analytics to then come up with a call score. And based on that score, we can then respond back to the soft switch with either a 503 or 603, saying this is a good call, do a route advance, meaning pass the call on, or this is a highly suspicious call, do not pass it. We'll send a 603 decline and drop the call. In the previous webinar that we did earlier in March, we go into great detail of how these all call flows work. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look at that. So what about CPaaS and UCaaS providers? They suffer from these kinds of attacks too. And this is more on the terminated service provider model. And here we're going to try to protect those platforms. What we're going to do is use the SBC that's inside their solution, which interfaces out to the carrier, to their intermediate carrier, maybe through a SIP trunk. When those calls arrive, we're going to use the reputation analytics from YouMail to look at that called and calling number, come up with a score, and then we can do a few things with that. One of them is we can use different routes for the call. We can send it to different pilot numbers inside the UCaaS platform, or we can drop the call. And this is a way, for example, a UCaaS service provider to significantly reduce the robocall damage to their subscribers. So this is a pretty popular method. A third one, of course, is that an enterprise could do it themselves. Very similar sort of strategy as I showed you before. SIP trunk comes from the carrier. The SBC would use the analytics to do analysis on it and then pass it along to the IPPBX based on the score, deciding whether or not to complete the call, drop it, or may possibly redirect it to voicemail to eliminate the call. So the most interesting one, the most recent, as we've come across, is a mitigation as a service. And what's happening with this is it's putting our ProSBC and the YouMail mitigation analytics in the cloud together. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a SIP trunk from a carrier that used to go to an enterprise. We're going to disconnect that SIP trunk and we're going to send it off to that SBC in the cloud. The SBC will do that scoring that we showed earlier and then pass the calls back to the enterprise. So this will pre-process and score these calls, passing the good calls on to the enterprise for use either in their on-premise IPPBX or in their cloud-based IPPBX or UCAS platform. And the beauty of this, of course, there's no on-premise equipment. It's all done on the cloud, and it's all the integrations all handled ahead of time by TelcoBridges and YouMail. And this is a brand new solution, and we look forward to, if you're interested in this, in the follow-up email you're going to get tomorrow from we'll have a little line there where you can click on it and let us know if you're interested in working with us on this mitigation as a service to help you help with the elimination of the bad calls. So just a quick wrap up, we got a few resources to learn more. Number one is a solution brief we put together on how service providers can use the YouMail integration on the originating service provider side. And this can be found on the website. Again, we'll put these links in the follow-up email. You don't have to scratch this down right now, but this can be found on our website, and you can get a quick overview of how this all works. And we also, thanks to Gerry, just added a new paper from YouMail. And Gerry, do you want to just give us a quick overview about your Know the Customer white paper?
Yeah, just a few words on that. We put together this white paper to explain, not only give some background information about StirShaken, many things that some people already know, but also be able to identify how analytics fits into StirShaken and to truly enable knowing one's customer. Not only, for example, I know you're Gerry Christensen, I know where you live, I know how to reach you, but providing the analytics component so that we can monitor Gerry Christensen's behaviors, or in this case, whoever it is that may be using a telephone number to place calls, whether they be good calls or not, to be able to monitor that and be able to identify those that are not desirable. That's what this white paper discusses, and I would encourage everybody to get a copy of it.
Yep, great. Yep, like I said, we'll pass this link along to you in the follow-up email. You go ahead and click on that, and we'll get you squared away with a copy of it. All right, lastly, as I mentioned before, we've done a host of webinars and quite a few of them on StirShaken, and an event earlier this year talking about robocall mitigation at the service provider. You can find all that on our YouTube library, and you can find that, of course, at youtube.com/TelcoBridges, and we highly encourage you to subscribe. And that way you'll learn about our videos as we go ahead, and all kinds of other content besides just these webinars. We do case studies and all kinds of interesting materials. So give that a try. And with that, let's move to some Q&A. So there's a couple of questions that have trickled in here, Gerry. So let's take a peek at those. And the first one is Dipen is curious as to how to identify those calls, and that might be one of two ways questions. So I'm gonna throw part of it at you, Gerry, and then I'll talk about some of the other part, which is how do you guys figure out it's a bad call, and then I'll talk about how do we pass that information on to the platforms downstream.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm going to answer the question in reverse, and then I'm going to answer the question literally. So the reverse part of it is, once we have identified that a particular telephone number is associated with a unwanted robocall campaign, then it's really easy because, again, we know that they're doing something wrong, and then we can provide treatment on that, which in the case of YouMail for our app is just simply to put it into a certain part of the voicemail, which would be the spam part of the voicemail. But if somebody is a customer of our data services, they could do whatever they want. They could label it, they could redirect it, they could send it to voicemail. That's once it's been identified. But your question is literally, how do we know that it's an unwanted call? So there's a couple different approaches there. One depends on if it is a brand protection service. Because if it's a brand protection service, and let's say our customer is Marriott, and I'll use them as an example because they actually are a customer, and I would encourage you to Google Marriott and YouMail to see what we're doing for them. We would obviously look for Marriott keyword to see if that has occurred in the audio. or anything like that. We would look for things like timeshare or whatever keywords that we know that we're looking for. That's one thing that we do. We also rely on crowdsourced feedback. Just like other analytics engines, to a certain degree, we rely on self-reporting. Hey, I got this call from this car warranty scam, do something about it. So we employ a variety of different techniques, but the important thing to note is once we identify a bad campaign, it gets a digital signature. And like I said, that has a very specific waveform that's repeated thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps millions of times. And that waveform looks identical or virtually identical enough that our algorithm knows when it sees that to apply treatment to a particular telephone number. And again, that's really important because the bad guys cycle through many, many numbers using this snowshoe scam technique. And otherwise, certain other analytics engines might otherwise let those go through because they're not aware that it's an unwanted robocall.
Got it. So I'll take the second half, which is, okay, so you've detected that this is a spammer, and you pass back to us the score, and we say, all right, what do we want to do with the score? Well, how that works with our ProSBC is we take that score, and that becomes a part of one of the rules in our routing engine. So the routing script can then say, all right, so based on that score, I'm going to redirect the call, or possibly respond with a like I showed a 302 or 603 kind of message. So we can change the route for where the call goes based on the score, or we can embed information inside the call SIP header that give you information about the call score downstream. So maybe a contact center or IPPBX or a CPaaS platform could use that score downstream to then change behavior as it goes on its way through. So hopefully that answers the question. Another question here said, YouMail, good, let's see, let me just kind of read the question again myself here. Well, probably, I think it would find, as maybe in contact center, I think this is where this is trying to go. In a contact center, one of the problems contact centers suffer with is the agent answers a dead air call, and it wastes a lot of time. And Gerry, you and I have talked about this in the past, that, this is a huge cost to the contact centers. If they take all the time that all these agents are answering dead air calls or these robocalls, it's a huge waste of their time. And if you take that and actually monitor, figure out what the cost of that is, it's a significant cost for a lot of these contact center agents. And so we did a little bit of arithmetic on that and found out that, putting a robocall mitigation at the front end of a contact center would be a real wise idea to get rid of these dead air calls.
Yeah, exactly. And we're talking about a contact center that allows the call to come straight to the agents as opposed to those that hit an IVR as a front end.
Right.
So the way that this would be implemented, what Alan's referring to, is we could have the session border controller use the YouMail data to identify those telephone numbers that are associated with an unwanted robocall campaign and have those numbers hit the IVR, whereas the other ones go straight through to the agent. So that way they would avoid talking to these robocallers, because the robocallers don't indiscriminate. They send numbers, they send calls to everybody.
Yep. Yeah, and we blogged about this month and a half ago or so.
That's right.
About a story we got a inquiry from a furniture maker who his agents answer. He tries to have their agents answer on one ring without IVR, and he was getting flooded with these. So interesting solution. All right, so question here from Eve. Is the mitigation as a service supported within Canada? And which is probably a good question to ask, which is, what's the geography for the YouMail data set?
Right now, it's North America. So Canada, yes, and United States, yes, and we're looking at extending that beyond North America.
Right. So yes, we could certainly implement that across Canada. I would be happy to work with you, Eve, on that, and we'll follow up on that. Another question: once the number is identified as being used by the bad actors, what happens to the real owner or user? And that's a good question. Is that is if somebody spoofs a bad number, let's say it's not StirShake, and they spoof a bad number, they spoof a number of a poor innocent consumer, and it's happened to me, and people start, calling you back saying, I missed a call from you, and you're like, "Mate, I didn't call you. I definitely didn't call you." Is there a way that this kind of ages out or times out, or how does that number eventually get freed up?
Yeah, absolutely. So while the illegal spoofing campaign is underway, the legitimate person that owns and has the right to use that number will be affected. They certainly will, because the terminating carrier makes the decision as to what to do with that number, whether it receives a label, whether it's redirected, or perhaps even blocked. So while the spoofing is going on, the legitimate owner certainly will be impacted. There's no doubt there. But what happens is, because YouMail is doing what we do and the other analytics engines are doing what they do, the bad actor will realize, hey, no one's answering. So they'll move on to another number. So we do our stuff to block it, to redirect and stuff like that. Once the bad actor moves on to another number, they're no longer hijacking that number. We will detect that, because we'll realize that we don't see tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of calls from that number anymore. We won't see that particular digital fingerprint associated with that number anymore. So then what we'll do is we'll, in real time, flip that number back to positive. And for some of these services that we're talking about, where we provide a data feed to the session border controller for real-time analytics, that will immediately be available to the SBC. And so we will no longer be labeling it or otherwise providing some adverse treatment to that number. So it's actually pretty easy and pretty programmatic.
Good. So Mark asked a question about the hosted service, about how is it billed, and right now the model is a base monthly fee plus a usage fee, and we can talk and get into some specifics on that for access to both the SBC and the analytics from YouMail. All right, so question from JJ here. How does a legitimate company conducting market research with live agents ensure calls are not being mislabeled as robocalls? So basically, how does someone get on the good list? How's that happen, Gerry?
Well, I would definitely recommend that you register with all the analytics engines, including YouMail, and you can contact me after this webinar to get more details on what to do about that. But I would suspect if you're not getting through, it's not because your number is being blocked, because you're not one of the worst of the worst. You're not like the car warranty scam or outright fraud. Most likely you're receiving a label, probably because of crowdsourced feedback. Sure. Because people just don't want to get those kind of calls, sadly. It's not an indictment of your business model. It's just that some people complain about that, and then that fits into the algorithm. But if you register, we could potentially fix things so that you don't get that kind of a labeling. So no promises there, but that's one of the reasons why it's always good to register with the analytics engines.
Good. All right, one last question from Gerry, one of our current customers, asking about getting started. And Gerry will reach out to you directly, and we'll set up a call. So with that, that does bring us to the end of the Q&A. And so I'm going to wrap up with, first of all, Gerry, thank you so much for spending the time on this and putting together the material, and for the white paper. We look forward to sharing that with everyone over the next few days.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I welcome everybody that's live on this webinar and anybody that sees it subsequently on YouTube. Please reach out to Alan and I. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And we're kind of all in this together. I mean, it's the white hats against the black hats and even the gray hats. We want to make sure that wanted robocalls get through. If it's public safety, we want to make sure that wanted real calls get through, and that people aren't inconvenienced, and certainly don't want people losing their money and being defrauded by these bad guys.
Right. Well, and with that, just a quick reminder, we are sending out a follow-up email. It'll likely go out tomorrow. It'll have a link to the recording and also to the slides, along with those links for the white paper and some of the other materials that we talked about today. And with that, I want to thank everyone for listening, and have a great day. That's it from here.